This is your brain on risk. This is Mind Over Money, the podcast where Kevin Cook exposes the psychology of investing.
Welcome back to Mind Over Money. I'm Kevin Cook, your field guide and storyteller for the fascinating arena of behavioral economics. My dad taught me to fly a small airplane when I was 16 years old. A little over 5 years ago, I think for his 80th birthday, I wrote a small book for him titled Flight Plan for Trading: What My Dad Taught Me About Markets. Well, the old bird passed away this Sunday, and while I look forward to finding the book among his things and sharing more of it with the world, I wanted to recap some of those lessons this week. Preparation and planning. These two best practices of all pilots are ingrained in you from the start of your training. Nothing good in flying comes without good preparation of both pilot and aircraft and planning. Before your first flight lesson, you've attended several hours of ground school to learn the basic mechanics of flight, aviation regulations, and weather dynamics. And before you even grab the keys to the plane, you've checked the weather extensively to be certain that conditions will suit your skill level and objectives for that flight. More on weather coming up. Assuming your aircraft is current on all its maintenance requirements, what's the pilot's job before he starts the engine? The pre-flight inspection of the plane. From physically moving the control surfaces like ailerons and rudder to checking the fuel for water, a pilot must know that his equipment is safe and ready for flight each and every time before takeoff. It's a completely different mentality than hopping in your car to drive to work or run errands. How different? How about visually scanning every square inch of the plane, looking for a loose rivet or screw, a new dent, leaking fluids, ice, snow, a bird's nest by the engine? And how is a pilot trained to make certain everything gets checked? Is he required to memorize all the steps and procedures and checks? Maybe. But more importantly, he or she is trained to use a checklist so that nothing is left merely to memory. That's because so much can go wrong in flight that could lead to a life-threatening situation. So nothing can be left to mere chance. Once inside the cockpit, there's a new checklist before you start the engine. You know, and when I think about it, when I type the word checklist, I don't even know if it was. I always picture it like with a dash, check dash list, but it's obviously one word now. In essence, a pilot's life is checklists. All right, preparation and planning part 2 now. The next levels of planning and preparation involve an ongoing process of training with your flight instructor where you learn new skills and how to handle the most common contingencies and emergencies. This would include aborting a takeoff and rehearsing procedures for engine failure. After a few hours with a good instructor, your mind is already looking for cornfields or roads where you might be able to land in such an emergency. Then there's training for events like stalls and spins. Your instructor teaches you the mechanics and procedures by demonstrating how to stall the aircraft and how to induce a spin, and of course, how to quickly recover from both. And then he or she asks you to repeat the procedures. You need to have at least 40 hours of basic flight training like this before you are qualified to take an exam that might grant you a private pilot's license and allow you to carry passengers. This training includes many takeoffs and landings. I was just looking at my old flight log, and it's amazing how quickly they add up. You could have dozens per week. And you're doing them in various conditions like crosswinds. So that adds an extra degree of complexity and demands on your skills to land with a wind that is not coming at you down the runway. So training full of, stalls and recoveries. You also have to do 3 hours of instrument flight training where you wear a hood. That's what they call it, a hood, but it's like a big visor that blocks your vision in front of you, so you're not looking out the window, and on the sides too, so you can't see out. You have no peripheral vision out the side windows. And this forces you to pilot and orient the aircraft only by reference to the instrument panel. And there's several key instruments here. So even though you are only qualified to fly in clear skies when you're a new pilot in training, clouds could come out of nowhere and reduce visibility drastically. And flying seems easy when you can see the ground and the horizon to keep the plane level and climb and execute turns. But learning to rely on the 3 A's, as I call them, can save your life. The first A is your airspeed indicator. How fast are you flying relative to the air in both knots and miles per hour? The attitude indicator, also known as the artificial horizon, and this instrument quickly tells you the pitch of the airplane, the nose up, nose down, level, in reference to the ground, and the altimeter, which is your altitude based on barometric pressure. Another handy indicator is the turn coordinator, or turn and bank indicator, as it's called in the Cessna 152, in which I trained as a teenager. And this is a really cool gyroscope that tells you how much you are actually turning horizontally to alter the aircraft heading versus slipping sideways with little change in your heading. And you can picture, like, if you don't know what a slip is, picture if you've ever watched a war movie with warbirds, right? And all of a sudden they're flying straight and level, and they might roll, or they might just slip sideways down and not really change their heading, but lose altitude quickly with a slip. And I would be remiss not to mention a fifth crucial instrument, the vertical speed indicator, which quickly tells you whether you are climbing or descending and at what speed. All this instrument talk brings to mind another secondary training tool that flight schools will use, the simulator. More on that coming up. Concurrent with all this instructor-supervised training, you also begin solo flights, which eventually culminate in the Big Kahuna, a 5-hour solo cross-country of at least 150 nautical miles, connecting 3 airfields in a triangle for a total of 3 takeoffs and 3 landings. So what's flying got to do with trading? Well, it wasn't until about 15 years later, after I got my pilot's license, so basically when I was in my early 30s, that I entered the world of markets. But what I immediately recognized was that trading was extremely tough and fraught with hazards that would steal your money. It seemed like everyone was failing. So actually what I discovered was that 95% of new traders fail because of their own behaviors, which make their money go away, like reacting emotionally to big price swings that can cause average folks to buy high and sell low. Think of the time you took on too much risk, or the time you panicked and sold good stocks at fire sale prices during a correction. Fear clouds our thought process and overrides sound decisions. So what's the solution? Exactly. Think like a pilot. Have rules that override your fear. Have systems and routines that support your decision-making and your mental health. Here's the Wikipedia intro definition for checklist. A checklist is a type of job aid used to reduce failure by compensating for potential limits of human memory and attention. It helps to ensure consistency and completeness in carrying out a task. From this discussion, I hope you take this away at the minimum. Never enter a trade without a checklist, including a rationale for the trade, the position size, risk, even if it's just a mental stop, at least, your objectives, short-term and long-term, and upcoming events. Could be earnings, expected news, the regulatory environment, M&A potential or chatter, the FDA, you know the drill. All right. Contingency is the word. Everything in flying is about what if. What if this or that goes wrong, or fails, or surprises you, et cetera, et cetera. Because when you assume all the stuff that can go wrong and then practice procedures to deal with them, you are calm, cool, and collected in carrying out the steps of a contingency solution. A pilot knows exactly what he or she will do in any possible situation. They've rehearsed it physically, if possible, and they've certainly rehearsed it mentally too. They have to because so many lives depend on their skill and steady reaction. Trading and investing are rarely life-threatening, but many have felt like their lives were destroyed by stupid mistakes in markets. And stupid mistakes, or even persistently bad habits, are preventable with systematic attention to training, rules, and procedures. Speaking of training, how many beginning traders practice with small amounts of money to simulate their potential interactions with markets and their own emotions before they start betting big to get rich? Not many. And how many experienced traders have instruments they check every morning and evening to tell them their market risk profile and their ability to withstand market shocks? Even less. Now let's think about the weather. Since weather is such an important force in safe aviation, it also offers some lessons for investors and traders. Some hard facts should set the tone of this thought experiment. 1, you can no more fight the market than you can fight the weather. 2, weather is a complex system, but it has scientific properties and patterns that lend to prediction. Markets, as predominantly social dynamics, are orders of magnitude more complex than weather and exhibit what Benoit Mandelbrot termed wild randomness. Most predictions are useless. Given these facts, think of all the people you know who complain about the weather almost every week. It's too cold, it's too hot, too wet, too dry, and so on. The next fact is this: they wouldn't be here to complain about the weather unless it contained precisely the variability it has now. Biological evolution was built on climate spectrums of variance. You can map that variability on bell curves and still keep it fairly predictable in the middle, even with the tales of 100-year floods and 100-year droughts. Now think about markets and their nearly infinite variability. The tails in markets are very fat, so fat that the averages in the middle are almost meaningless. That's what Nassim Taleb taught us in The Black Swan, with big nods to Benoit Mandelbrot. Should we ever be surprised or get emotional about big fat tail events in markets? Certainly not. My early training as a pilot taught me simple things like planning is everything and indecision will kill you. In markets, these might translate as planning is everything still, and the inability to execute on your plans will make you broke. I conclude today's episode with this section, and I've sort of titled it in the article version, which will appear on Zax.com and have a couple of links too. A pilot flies home to that big hangar in the sky. My dad was the strong silent type, to be sure, but he also had a great sense of humor. He gave me an appreciation for the comedic genius of Bob Newhart, such that I memorized an entire skit, The Driving Instructor, and performed it on stage solo for my 6th grade talent show. I knew I thought I had a future in acting or TV, but it wasn't to be. My dad gave me something more important too that I shall never forget: his confidence. I could never have started, much less finished, my flight training without his belief in me. He was my first flight instructor, and he taught me how to think about planning and about risk and about contingencies more than anything ever could. He approved me to make solo flights in the summer of my 16th year. Then he had a mild heart attack, and our training stopped. Luckily for him and our family, he was able to have an angioplasty procedure to open a clogged artery, and then eventually he was approved, got medical approval to resume his career as a pilot for United Airlines. He went on for nearly 2 decades to fly for United, and ended his career as a captain of 747s and 767s, taking people to Tokyo and Frankfurt. But at the time, when I was still becoming a pilot, when I was 16, 17 years old, he couldn't get back in the cockpit right away. So when I was 17, he handed me off to another instructor at our local airport. It was a good thing Dad taught me how to listen and respond to the bark of a flight instructor, because the new one I got was a pit bull. And that's the way it has to be when you're learning to fly. There are no shortcuts, no baloney, no excuses, because anything can go wrong at any time. Again, investing and trading aren't that serious, but we could all do better with our money and our decisions and our emotions if we adopted more best practices of pilots. On my dad's 87th birthday this past February, I arranged a video presentation for him via Skype of some things I thought he might enjoy, like a short retrospective on Chuck Yeager, who had just passed recently, and some video of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic, some of their recent flights over the past few years. Because I grew up, we watched all the space launches. I just grew up with the love of the space program from just hanging out with my dad. And over the years growing up, we would go up to Oshkosh to the Experimental Aircraft Association fly-ins, EAA. And I'm sure my dad at some point had met the Rutan brothers, who they built experimental aircraft that were very unique. And they were always up at Oshkosh. And then the Rutan brothers were instrumental in designing, building, and testing advanced aircraft that eventually won the Ansari X Prize in 2004 for Spaceship One, thus attracting the interest and dreams and wealth of Richard Branson. And thus Virgin Galactic was born a few years later. For my dad's birthday presentation, I also showed him a video of my brother Rory talking about their unique aerobatic plane, the Sorel Hyperbipe, and how Rory had won some competitions in aerobatics, and then restored the aircraft. And I forgot to mention that Dad also had a Piper Cub when we were kids, and liked to take us upside down whenever possible. I'll in the article version, I'll link to the video of my brother Rory talking about the Hyperbipe, which is pretty interesting. And hopefully you can hear the audio just fine, because when I showed it to Dad through an iPad, I didn't have the Skype audio enabled for the video stream from YouTube, so he could hear it. About 20 minutes into my birthday presentation, Dad asks, "Is there supposed to be sound?" I don't think I was laughing at the time, but I am now. And I bet he is too. Take it from Eugene Ole Olson. Oh, did I tell you I was his foster kid? Work hard, save your money, plan, play, and have fun. And if something doesn't work out, let's at least have a laugh about it.
This material is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein constitutes investment, legal, accounting, or tax advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold a security. Do not act or rely upon the information and advice given in this podcast without seeking the services of competent and professional legal, tax, or accounting counsel. Publication and distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and the information contained herein does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No recommendation or advice is being given as to whether any investment or strategy is suitable for a particular investor. It should not be assumed that any investments in securities, companies, sectors, or markets identified and described were or will be profitable. All information is current as of the date herein and is subject to change without notice. Any views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Zacks Investment Research as a whole.